How does a presidential hunting trip, two Jewish Russian immigrants, and a penny candy store selling homemade teddy bears lead to a series of kit models that were put out by the Ideal Toy Company to include the Kam-A-Matic action found in such rare kits as the Halibut, USS Enterprise, Thor, Mercer, Duesenberg, and Battling Betsy? Let's get into it. The Ideal Toy Company was founded by Morris and Rose Michtom, a husband and wife team of Jewish-Russian immigrants. They came to America around 1899 as near penniless immigrants, married, and being a very hard-working and enterprising couple, soon had a store on Tompkins Avenue in Brooklyn, New York, that sold candy and other penny items. Rose was also a seamstress, and to help make ends meet, she sewed plush toys that were also sold in the store. Morris and Rose followed the news, and in 1902, they saw where President Teddy Roosevelt refused to kill a small bear while on an unsuccessful hunting trip in Mississippi. His hunting partners had tied the bear to a tree so he could shoot it, but he refused. That wasn't hunting. Political cartoonist Clifford Berryman heard the story and created a cartoon that was published in the Washington Post newspaper on November 16, 1902. When the Michtoms saw the cartoon, they were inspired to create a stuffed plush toy that resembled Berryman's drawing. Morris put it out in the front window display with a sign that said, "Teddy's Bear." They sold over a dozen in short order. It was obvious the bear could be a good seller, but Morris was concerned about using the president's name. Reportedly, he mailed the original bear to the White House with a letter asking if they could name the bear after the president. Roosevelt responded that although he didn't see how his name would help sales, they were certainly welcome to do so, and the teddy bear was born. It is not known for certain if Rose and Morris had really created the very first teddy bear, but it was the first one to get sales traction, as everybody wanted one. Morris and Rose quickly realized that the profit margins on bears were much better than on candy. They knew they were onto something, so they made candy during the day and sewed bears at night, but they could not keep up with the demand. The teddy bear swept the nation in popularity. Within a year, the Michtoms stopped selling candy and dedicated their full effort to teddy bear production. Roosevelt and his party used the bear as their symbol in 1904, and Roosevelt had Michtom place bears all around the White House for public functions. Eventually, Michtom's entire stock of bears was purchased by the wholesaler Butler Brothers. To maintain a supply, the Butlers backed the Michtoms in founding the Ideal Novelty and Toy Company in Hollis, Queens. With the runaway success of the bear, they expanded their product line to dolls. Most dolls of the era were fragile, but Ideal used a rugged mix of compressed sawdust and glue. They were so successful that no less than 200 such styles of Ideal composition dolls were produced. Ideal had established itself as an innovative company, and they captured larger and larger parts of the market. Ideal even did well during the Great Depression of the 1930s, while many businesses shut down or suffered. The story of the Ideal Toy Company is a very long and involved one, and since it has been well covered, I'll just leave some links below for those who wish to read up on it. As for kit models, they would come along decades later, after Morris and Rose had passed. Rose passed in 1937 and Morris in 1938. Some sources say it was their son and some say it was their nephew Benjamin who took over. Either way, he had an excellent business sense and hired toy guru Lionel Weintraub in 1941. Weintraub spent his adult life working at Ideal, becoming its president in 1962 and retiring in 1983. He had a knack for knowing what would sell and what would not in the toy market. He survived the boom or bust toy market and became a member of the Toy Industry Hall of Fame, and is credited with introducing such famous games and toys as Kerplunk, the Magic 8 Ball, and of course the Rubik's Cube. But back to the models. In 1941, Ideal acquired its first two plastic injection molding machines. The hope was to make doll heads and body parts from plastic to replace the composition constructions, and Ideal was not disappointed with the results. In 1943, a large printing company went bankrupt, and Ideal reportedly bought the factory for pennies on the dollar. This was the Jamaica Avenue, Hollis, Queens location, and it was soon busily humming along with hundreds of employees. Being a manufacturing company, Ideal boomed during World War II to 5 times its 1941 size, being valued at over $11 million by the war's end. In the baby boomer times following World War II, the company became even more successful. In 1953, the name was changed to the Ideal Toy Company, later abbreviated to ITC for kit model sales. That would later be renamed ITC Modelcraft. Ideal embraced plastics, eventually installing 72 injection molding presses and putting their primary competitor, American Character Doll Company, out of business. But Ideal did not stop with dolls. They produced an extensive and successful line of wind-up toys, games, doll houses, and furniture, and much more. Ideal's management team was always looking for new opportunities, but wasn't sold on these newfangled plastic model kits. They watched as Gallon and Gallon's highway pioneers affected the hobby world in the early 1950s. Given their experience with plastics, it was only natural that Ideal moved into the plastic kit model business, but they did so slowly. After all, these plastic kits may just be a fad. By the early to mid-1950s, the growth of Revell, Monogram, Aurora, Lindbergh, and Hawk convinced the Ideal staff that getting into the plastic model business was a worthwhile investment. Ideal began to make plastic kit models, but they could not shake their toy company roots. Initially marketed under the ITC name, the first year for ITC kits was either 1954 or 1955, but it would later be renamed ITC Modelcraft in 1957. Ideal did not date their early kits, but the opening page of the 1957 ITC Modelcraft catalog proudly declares, "This catalog marks the introduction of the ITC Modelcraft line." Ideal made a 1956 Oldsmobile Starfire with 130 parts in the same year, but it can be debated if this was a model kit or a toy. It was originally intended as a toy, along with the large-scale Corvette, but they had to be assembled. ITC pressed these toys and others like them into model service as part of the line, but that later proved to be a mistake. The Robert E. Lee Riverboat and the USS Constitution were true model kits and not toys, and were also introduced in 1957. There are no dates on the box's instructions or parts. They just say Ideal Toy Company and not ITC. Since most or all of the early Ideal kits were rolled into the ITC line, we will concentrate on the ITC kits only. At first glance, the Modelcraft line seems extensive. However, they were masters of marketing and often changed boxes and kit numbers. Catalogs for Modelcraft are known to exist for 1957 through 1963. Earlier Ideal Toy Company catalogs, if located, could identify earlier kits and the dates of the releases. There is an extensive list of models that they made. With aircraft, they had the B-29 Superfortress with the Kam-A-Matic, which we'll talk about later. The Grumman Goose was motorized, as was the Staggerwing Beach, and the Beechcraft Bonanza. They would later do the North American XF-108 with booster and launcher, the Piasecki VZ-8P Jeep, Sikorsky S-62 helicopter, Northrop T-38 Talon, Northrop N156, the F-5A prototype, the Dornier 10, Stinson Trimotor for Eastern Air Service, U.S. Navy Goodyear Blimp K-68, the Curtiss Condor. There seems to be some debate on the Condor. Some sources show it coming out in 1954 and others show it coming out in 1957. I tend to lean towards the 1957, but I can't verify that. The Martin MB-2 bomber, which went on to a very long series of repops. The Savoia Marchetti SM-55X, McDonnell XV-1, the Spirit of St. Louis and Wright Flyer kit set, Sikorsky 55 and SPAD 13 set, which was followed by Missiles and Spacecraft. The Thor missile base, which is a Kam-A-Matic, was one of their later kits, and it's also one of the Holy Grail kits today, but we'll talk about that later. The Explorer 1 satellite with a full interior, which I personally believe is one of their best kits. I have one and I really enjoy it, although mine's the Glencoe repop. And they also made 2 versions of the BB-1 missile that were motorized. In watercraft, they had the Halibut submarine, the SS France ocean liner, Graf Spee pocket battleship, the NS Savannah, which was motorized, but not with a nuclear engine, the World War I sub chaser, USS Enterprise aircraft carrier, which was a Kam-A-Matic model, USS Oregon battleship, which is motorized, the Wheeler Express cruiser, the ocean liner SS United States, the schooner Water Witch with sails, the USS Constitution, the riverboat Robert E. Lee, Claremont, the yacht Atlantic with sails, that was made in 1957 and that was motorized, the Corsair II with sails. These are just some random samples of a very large catalog that had, I believe, over 134 molds, and not including improved versions of the molds. So I'm not going to go over the whole catalog here, but you get the idea. They also had a group of models that were sold under the Precision Miniatures logo. I built several of those, and they're actually quite good. ITC was not content to simply make static models, and this would eventually prove problematic. Perhaps due to the company's background as a toy company, ideal leaders wanted the best kits to have working features far beyond anything the other model companies made. The ITC engineers, led by Cal Smith, certainly delivered. Many kits, such as the Graf Spee, for example, were issued three ways: static, motorized, and remote control. But even that was not enough. Plastic modeling reached its operational zenith in a series of ITC kits that actually quote-unquote worked. To market such advanced and complicated kits, the term Kam-A-Matic was coined, and it accurately described how the new kits functioned. Kam-A-Matic kits are still the most complicated operating plastic models ever created. Ships sailed in patterns and launched aircraft, submarines surfaced, dove, and launched missiles. Cars would run in squares or circles or even a custom pattern, then run them in reverse, and turn their lights on and off. The obvious downside was price and complexity. The Kam-A-Matic kits sold for between $8.95 and almost $12. This was very expensive for a plastic kit, and ITC soon discovered what Revell, Monogram, and Renwall already knew. The price point created slow sellers. Additionally, they were marketed as typical models, but the complication was well beyond the average builder. Many young modelers had trouble building these kits so that they would operate as advertised. As complaints and requests for replacements came in, ITC hurriedly slapped a "For Advanced Model Makers" sticker on top of the box. For later Kam-A-Matic kits, this was made a permanent part of the box top. The Kam-A-Matic line included the Enterprise CV-65, which could automatically run a selection of patterns, launched aircraft, and had elevators move up and down. The USS Halibut submarine, which could automatically dive and surface and run any number of patterns, and remove a Regulus missile from the hangar and fire it. The Mercer Raceabout, which automatically runs a selection of patterns via the front steering wheel, the lights turn off and on, and reverses and has motor sound. The 1934 Duesenberg Rolston JN Roadster, which worked much the same as the Mercer. And of course, the Thor missile base, which automatically removes the Thor missile from storage, tows it to the launch pad where it's erected and launched. The B-29 Super Fortress bomber, which for some reason they called the Sky Ranger, which automatically starts the engines one by one, then taxis down the runway and shuts down. And of course the Battling Betsy tank, which could climb obstacles, move forward and in reverse, the turret rotated, and fired a magazine of projectiles. ITC did score a marketing coup when the USS Enterprise, the Mercer Raceabout, the B-29, and Halibut submarines appeared on the TV show Maverick. To celebrate this, ITC put stickers in the box tops stating, "As seen on Maverick." These kits can be found with or without this sticker. The October 1962 issue of Boys Life magazine ran an article which was actually more of a long advertisement that explained exactly how Kam-A-Matic worked. A lot of really great details about the Kam-A-Matic system is known today because of pieces of wholesale distributor advertising that still exist. As in any advertising, there's a degree of showmanship involved, but it does provide an important look into what they thought they could do. The valuation of the U.S. hobby market was about $100 million in the mid-50s. Ideal assumed they would have distribution success for ITC through their existing vast wholesale network for their common toy line. Their philosophy was, ITC's new products were marketed as kits that work. This was a strong theme in product development, clearly the motivator behind the Kam-A-Matic remote control and motorization. Ideal had long been making dolls and toys with innovative working features. Given their toy market dominance, they assumed this strategy would work as well for model kits. Since almost all of the new kits had some of these features, ITC Modelcraft was betting their future on it. Such kits were complicated, and the primary target group for these kits was young adults. Small-scale models, Ideal's previous precision miniatures, were re-released by ITC, not only in new boxes but also in blister packs as well. Ideal got a lot of mileage out of this line, and at a very low price point. And this leads us into the end of ITC Hobby Craft. Ideal itself went on to grow into an even larger company, so what happened to hobby kits? The final ITC kit catalog was 1963, so it's safe to say that by 63 or 64 was the final year of kit production. Ideal never stated why it got out of the kit model business, but a warehouse full of unsold kits paints a pretty obvious picture. The warehouse full of kits was cleared out under the name Ringo. Now, what Ringo was is still not exactly clear even to this day. Either ITC sold the stock to someone who marketed them under the Ringo name, or ITC created Ringo to unload the remaining kits under another name, as selling these kits under the ITC name would have tainted their corporate reputation. Looking at the Ringo kits, it's easy to see why ITC distanced themselves from the Ringo kits. Often Ringo kits were missing parts, especially clear parts, and a lot of the specific action features such as the motors. And what I believe was going on was they were selling off what was in the warehouse, and some of the kits may not have been completed going to the production line, but they didn't let that slow them down. From what I can put together, ITC Modelcraft was overall probably not a profitable venture for Ideal. And as for the reason why and why it had to cease operations, I think these are the main reasons. First, complexity and price. In the golden age of plastic kits, complexity never ensured a great selling model. Actually, the opposite was true. Just look at Revell's wonderful F-102 with all the ground support equipment. Complex kits were expensive to make, required much more R&D and tooling, and in the case of ITC kits, the actual metal contacts, shafts, chains, wire, electric motors added considerably to the cost of the kit. When Aurora's common kits were selling for 39 cents to $1.30, the Kam-A-Matic cars were almost $9. To put this into further focus, Aurora's giant bombers line was $2.59, and they were very reluctant to expand that series, choosing instead to concentrate on lower price point kits. Number 2 was all of the complaints, which was a result of the complexity. Simply including a motor with a kit greatly increased the chances that the customer would fail to build the kit correctly or be disappointed. The extreme of this was found in the Kam-A-Matic series. Just look at A.C. Gilbert's collapse following the complicated and flawed James Bond slot car road race set from 1965. Number 3, I would say, was detail and scale. ITC pressed many Ideal toys into use as model kits. These were nothing other than toys that had not been assembled. They consisted of a handful of parts and were out of scale. Probably due to complaints, ITC even put large stickers on these kits stating that they were for beginners. A good example is the 1956 Ford Thunderbird. The scale is listed as 1 to 24, but it measures closer to 1 to 21. Even worse, it's very difficult to determine if the kit's a 55, a 56, or a 57. From the details and even the shape, it's really none of the above. Perhaps that's why ITC simply listed it as a Thunderbird in a later issue. Some box art even shows the car adorned with side trim that was never used on any T-Bird. It's difficult to imagine any sales potential for this kit in the 1960s, although today it's popular with collectors, but that's probably more due to rarity. Additionally, a complex kit does not make a good scale kit. The working features often detracted from the scale. The Halibut sub, for example, is not even close to a scale representative of the real thing. The USS Enterprise is closer, but still suffers from the required addition of working features, and Aurora's superb kit from 1961 put it to shame. When the novelty of the features wore off, the actual kit had little to no appeal for the more serious model builders. ITC was learning just as Aurora had by the 1960s. Young boys grow up, and public tastes change through exposure. The same poorly designed kits from the 50s did not sell to a more educated and experienced crowd. The fourth thing was poor distribution. Ideal, with its vast toy distribution network, may have thought that placing their model kits on shelves would be easy, and it does initially seem that way, but as Mattel would learn when they acquired Monogram, models are not toys, they're crafts. Many of the ITC magazine advertisements mention finding the kits at Grant's retail stores, which is understandable as model kits were sold everywhere back then, but it was hardly a perfect fit. Some ads as late as 1959 and 1960 mentioned that if you cannot find the model in a dealer, then you could order direct from ITC. For a giant toy maker, the need to resort to direct sales is not a good sign. Revell's founder, Lou Glazer, had discovered early on that distribution and shelf space was everything. Some builders from the 60s have said that ITC kits were sometimes adjacent to the toy section, so you had to go looking for them. The fifth problem was overproduction. ITC had a warehouse full of unsold kits, which shows they were being made and stocked in anticipation of orders that did not materialize. This is sadly not that uncommon in the toy and model industry, and it can be disastrous, even bankrupting for a company depending on its size and financial stability. The inability to control production to meet demand is expensive in raw materials, labor, floor space, and even taxes in some states that tax inventory. Additionally, a warehouse of unsold items is disappointing to the company executives. The lack of decals, clear parts, working parts implies that the primary injection molding production was not well coordinated with the peripheral parts that were needed to complete the kits. This probably explains why Ringo was selling so many kits with these particular parts missing. Number 6, which was less important, but I think it should be mentioned, was the uninspired box art. In the early days of modeling, kits would sell based on box art and novelty alone, and IT's box art just didn't stand up to the other manufacturers. When put side by side on the shelves, Monogram and Revell art was more realistic. Then again, they were up against the greats such as Jack Linwood in that department. So in conclusion, ITC got into a field that seemed like a natural fit for a toy company, but it was not. Models are not toys, but a hobby craft, and they need to be sold through hobby shops as well as other retailers, but perhaps most of all, they need to stay relevant. That means as the hobby evolved, they needed to evolve with it, making better scale models and better detailing. A few kits like Revell's 1:40 scale A1 Sky Raider had many working parts, and some monogram kits had play value, but for the most part, kit builders evolved into a detail-oriented crowd that wanted accuracy. No toy-like Navy F-102s being launched off of aircraft carriers. So by 1964, ITC Hobby Craft was gone. In 1982, the Ideal Toy Company was sold to CBS Toys for more than $50 million. Yes, CBS Toys was part of the broadcasting giant CBS. 2 years later, CBS Toys sold the Ideal Toy Company to Viewmaster International. Yes, the people that invented the Viewmaster stereoscope toys. After the acquisition, Viewmaster International changed its name to Viewmaster Ideal. In 1989, Viewmaster Ideal was acquired by Tyco Toys for more than $40 million. Tyco Toys then merged with Mattel in 1997, and this is when the Ideal Toy Company name ceased to exist. The trademarks or brands owned by the Ideal Toy Company are now owned by Mattel or were sold to Hasbro. Hasbro has been selling ITC's board games, namely Mousetrap and Kerplunk. The toy company Spin Master bought the license for the Rubik's Cube in 2020 for about $50 million. It should be noticed that some of ITC modelcraft kits have become holy grail kits today. Almost every diehard collector has heard of the ITC Thor missile base or Halibut submarine model. The Thor is amongst one of the most valuable collectible models out there. The Halibut and the ITC Kam-A-Matic action kits are close behind. Both kits have fantastic action features if you can get them to work. The Thor is automatically removed from a shelter, taken to a launcher, raised, and fired. The Halibut dives, surfaces, and removes a Regulus missile. I mean, come on. You gotta admit, if you can get it to work, that's pretty cool for a mid-50s toy. But that did not equate into it being a commercial success. They were, and still are, the most complicated operating plastic models ever created. I'm Max of Max's Models. Take care and model on. Well, hello everybody. I just wanted to add a few bonus features here. The video was getting pretty long, so I had excised a few things and decided, you know what, I'll put it on the end for anyone who may be interested. ITC did do some very well-respected kits, and some pretty unusual stuff, like the Neanderthal man also with a skeleton. That's pretty unusual, but kind of cool. And they also did store build-ups, which most companies did back then, but I didn't mention that these things are very sought after for any company, and ITC is no exception. Here we have one that was done for the Sub Chaser, but they also did store build-ups in sets, like that would have as many as a dozen small models in one case for the retailer to put out. These were clever marketing. ITC was very active in marketing. They also had their Marvel Metal series of animals, mostly exotic animals. You would use this gold material to sort of make a plastic model like a metal statue when you were done. They never really caught on that well, as I can tell, but they're still out there, and they're like a lot of things, they've gotten kind of rare, so they're sort of sought after. A lot of their regular models are just expensive simply because there aren't that many out there, and they were pretty well respected models for the time that they were made. And the XF-108 Rapier, which is really a very inaccurate model because it looks very little like the actual Rapier that was being designed and the mock-up being built, but it was still cool, and it's become one of the holy grail kits for a lot of people. And I just wanted to mention that if it sounded like I was coming down kind of hard on ITC about their lack of detail, they did have some actually very good kits, and they were into slot cars and other things as well. But there's only so much I can cover without the video turning it into a 2-hour-long diatribe. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Guys, do you have any experience with ITC kits, and what is it? Take care of yourselves, and as always, model on.